let's take you back to that decision by the Justice Minister to give Gauteng's 6,000 crime prevention wardens the same legal status as Gauteng's provincial traffic officers. And we were starting in that conversation with Chrispin Phiri, who speaks for the ministry. Let's see if his line is a little bit better. Chrispin, let's try again. You were sharing with our viewers why the minister made this decision.
Thank you, Iman. So as I was saying, in terms of the Criminal Procedure Act, when one requires to enforce certain elements of the criminal justice system, or generally certain powers that are related to law enforcement, one has to make application to the Minister of Justice in terms of Section 333(4) of the Criminal Procedure Act. So the Minister had to review the application that was sent by Gauteng Provincial Government, and after having reviewed it and analyzed what is required by the provincial government, it was then agreed that the best way for us to ensure that the amaPanyaza are able to give effect to what the Gauteng government would like is in terms of the National Traffic Police Act, the National Traffic Act, and that would be then to give them peace officer powers which are aligned to the Gauteng Traffic Police. So, in essence, how the process unfolded.
Just a quick housekeeping thing. There was that 2011 Gazette that people are talking about, which made it clear that these GCPWs, which is the Gauteng Crime Prevention Wardens, would have all the powers conferred on a peace officer in terms of the Criminal Procedure Act, as well as all the powers confirmed on a police official in terms of that same Criminal Procedure Act. Is this reaffirming that? Is it adding to it? What's different between that and this?
No, that's one interpretation of the Gazette, but that Gazette is actually quite explicit in the powers that are conferred to Gauteng Traffic Police. So, for example, in the Criminal Procedure Act, policing powers would extend to search and seizure, entering one's property, to seize unlawful material and so on. And that's strictly a policing function. So traffic police do not have such functions. They would be limited to enforcing provincial laws, whereas the laws that I've just outlined now, search and seizure, are generally what we call national policing laws. So the role of the crime wardens would be very limited, but of course they also remain as they are law enforcement agents. So where they would observe a crime happening, like any other law enforcement agency, they can attend to that scene to ensure that they arrest the situation, excuse the pun, and then allow to take over from there and ensure that the Criminal Procedure Act takes full effect.
Okay. What about firearms? Are they empowered to hold and carry firearms?
Firearms, man, in terms of the Firearms Control Act, anyone can bear a firearm subject to certain conditions, that you're a fit and proper person, and so on and so on. And that is regulated by the Firearms Control Act. So it is the same regulation that applies to private security companies. In this instance, it would be a similar regulation determined by the National Commissioner of the South African Police Services as to if these individuals are required to bear firearms, what are the conditions and how should those firearms be held. Likewise, is done with private security firms and private citizens.
Yeah, I get the point that you're making, but they are very, well, in the layman's understanding, very different types of training that a security officer would undergo as opposed to a civilian who's bearing arms, as opposed to a police officer who's using a firearm in the execution of their duty. Are you saying they're all the same?
This is precisely what this Gazette also makes provision for, that there should be specific training that will be determined in conjunction with the National Police Commissioner, as well as the relevant legislative body in this instance, which will be the National Traffic Act, which would specify the type of training that these law enforcement officers would have to undergo or have undergone. So that is quite clear. But for instance, generally, the conditions to bear a firearm in general can never be watered down. It's quite a very high threshold, at least in our country, for individuals to bear firearms, even more so for law enforcement officers and peace officers.
Two things then. The training they've undergone, from our understanding, a 3-month crash course in being able to do this by no means capacitates them and prepares them for the two roles which, for the roles that have now kind of been officially conferred upon them. Are you saying that before they can take on this responsibility fully, there's a caveat that they would first have to undergo the training similar to a traffic officer or a police officer before they can execute this duty?
Again, this is a version that has been disputed by the Gauteng government to say that these are individuals that are still undergoing training, and what you are seeing now is them essentially being on-the-job training. They've not yet completed their training, but the Gauteng government can really go into detail as to what type of training this is. But it would have to be the exact same training that the Gauteng traffic police have undergone, because they are exercising or have the authority to exercise powers of that nature.
But this is concerning because it drives us, Chrispin, just again by my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, into the same territory of ambiguity that bedeviled the first iteration of what these powers were going to be, necessitating the minister to take the actions that he's taken now. No one in Johannesburg or Gauteng or anywhere else wants a peace officer with training wheels on, with an armed firearm in their pocket executing the law, because the laws empower them to execute it, but they can't. They don't have the capacity or the training.
Yes, but there's a factual assumption in your statement that they currently are bearing firearms, and my understanding is that's not the case. But they are required to propel high-powered vehicles and so on, but they're not conducting activities exclusively on their own as we speak now.
All right. So again, just for clarity then, Chrispin, as traffic officers now, I mean, can they execute their duties as traffic officers now?
The Gauteng government has said they are still undergoing training, so they've not yet completed the process of training. So that, as I understand it from the Gauteng government submission, no, they are not yet fully regarded as law enforcement officers. They are still under the process of training.
So again, final question. The Gauteng, well, the province of Gauteng would have to make sure that training is complete before releasing them back into society to execute these new roles, or these roles that have now been clarified by the minister. Okay. All right. Thank you very much for that, Chrispin. Appreciate your time. That was the Justice Department Spokesperson, Chrispin Phiri.